Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to read a note through holding up there. Anyway, let's call this October 17th meeting to order. Let's start with a moment of silence and a pledge of allegiance. Councilor Pena, would you lead it? Thank you. Thank you all. We do have a quorum, but I think there will still be a couple more coming in. Ms. Nair and Commissioner Quesada. Pablo Royal, trustee Pablo Royal, has been excused for this evening. So Mr. Talbert's here. And Ms. Nair's here. So let's begin with the approval of the minutes of the September 19th, 2018 meeting.
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Proclamations and awards. This is always the fun part for me, and for those of you to whom I apologized on the way in, thank you. And for those who I haven't apologized to yet, oh, that's not it yet. Right now it's proclamations and awards from Associate, Mr. Sanchez is going to talk, and then we'll do the quarterly employee incentive awards because they're great this time. Good evening, Mr. Sanchez.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the authority. I wanted to update you on two noteworthy events since our last meeting. The first occurred this week. The authority was recognized by the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies with its Platinum Award for Utility Excellence. In that award, it actually cited this board and the policies you've adopted to guide the utility as one of the bases for the award. Also, the significance of this award is that it was peer-reviewed. So it wasn't just an association identifying the authority. It was 21 individual public utilities of similar size or larger who reviewed us over the period of several years and gave us this designation of excellence. So that's something to be proud of. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Secondly, last week, we were upgraded by Standard & Poor's to a AAA. Again, not totally for our financial position, but also cited policies this board has adopted and many of the programs and services we offer with excellence. So those two things are noteworthy. Wanted to make sure you were aware of them, and thank all of you for what you do.
Thank you, and I think we should give a big round of applause for all of the employees who helped make this happen. I think David did. Yes. Okay, we had pictures taken already, so, yeah. The very next one is the Quarterly Employee Incentive Awards. This is the big one. Everybody here is just like dialing for dollars. So if the employees are here to receive the award, please come forward, and when your name is called, and then let us congratulate you afterwards. So there are a bunch of you this time. You've been very busy this period. First one is Martin Sierra, $50. Come on down. Martin is recognized for saving the utility some $2,000 by finding alternative sources for diesel engine batteries. Thank you, Martin. Christopher Lucero and Dennis Sanchez. They will each receive $275 plus 4 hours of leave each. Christopher and Dennis are recognized for their persistence and innovation in troubleshooting and discovering the cause of a serious malfunction at the Miles Road Reservoir. Christopher Gustafson. Chris is recognized for his innovative use of SharePoint in streamlining the development review board process. Chris will receive $100. Monica Sandoval. Monica will receive $50 in recognition for going above and beyond her job description to lead morale building efforts at the utilities Plaza del Sol offices. Thank you, Monica. Ron Vigil, Ruben Cuellar, Juan Martinez, Jose Martinez Medina, and Alejandro Granados. $150 each plus 4 hours of paid vacation. These individuals are recognized for doing such an exemplary job on a service line repair that a customer was moved to write a letter of thanks to the utility for their persistence and professionalism in the face of equipment malfunctions. Thank you. You are good representatives for the Water Utility Authority. Dennis Rumley and Carrie Bishop will each receive $50. Denise and Carrie are recognized for saving ratepayers some $10,000 by handling an increased water waste enforcement workload while short one staff member without hiring temporary help. Thank you. Laurel Hager, $100. Laurel is recognized in the health and wellness category for her participation in the 2018 Senior Olympics. You're not old enough, Laurel, but in which she competed in the 5K, the 50-meter dash, the 100-meter dash, and the javelin throw, earning a bronze medal in the javelin and placing 4th in the 50-meter dash. Her exceptional performance qualified her to compete in both events at nationals next year. Laurel is a truly inspiring health and wellness role model. Way to go, Laurel. Thank you. David Boyd and Eric Murray will each receive $50. David and Eric are recognized for innovating noteworthy improvements in the business process for documenting returned mail in the customer care and billing system. Thank you. Ivan Cortez will receive $150. Ivan is recognized for saving the utility and its ratepayers some $25,000 by undertaking the design, testing, and verification of extensive, I'm not sure what SCADA stands for, but SCADA system upgrades that typically would be sourced to an outside engineering firm. Ivan, thank you. John Ebia, maybe, $100. How bad was that, John? It's good. Okay. John, it's the $100, isn't it? John is recognized for his implementation of needed improvements to SCADA and control systems operations. Thank you. Jeremy Anderson, $100. Jeremy is recognized for his exceptional work in troubleshooting and correcting chronic and expensive system malfunctions at the Arroyo del Oso non-potable pump station and the Ridgecrest well field. Thank you. Andrew Marquez, $100. Andrew is recognized for stopping while on duty to render first aid and obtain emergency medical assistance for the victim of a fall. Thank you, Andrew. Monica Anaya, $100. Monica is recognized for her efforts in providing support above and beyond her job description for operations at both the surface water treatment plant and the Southside Water Reclamation Plant. Vincent Archibek, Francisco Sandoval, Frank Mirabal, and Jeremy Sainz, $100 each. These individuals are recognized for innovating new approaches to energy management that yielded a $600,000 rebate from P&M via their Peak Saver program. This represents a 37% increase over our previous top rebate. Wow, way to go, guys. Thank you. Donald Harrison. Donald will receive $150. He's recognized for going out of his way while on duty to assist a bicyclist who was struggling to carry her bike home on an injured knee after experiencing a flat tire. Donald, thank you. Jerry Sanchez, Ernesto Unali, Adrian Martinez, Wally Gurile, and Rene Garcia. Each will receive $100. These individuals are recognized for going above and beyond their job descriptions to complete restoration work on a water authority training facility that had experienced flood damage, saving the utility some $14,000 in outside repair costs. Thank you. Mark Elaim, $50. Mark is recognized for his efforts in optimizing his team's implementation of the Maximo 7.6 work order management system. Mark, thank you, if you're here. Cody Elwell, $50. Cody is recognized for his above and beyond efforts to address security and grounds maintenance issues at a utility well site. Thank you, Cody. Trevor Courier, Gerald Duran, John Lovato, and Javier Baca. Each will receive $100. These individuals are recognized for completing in 2 weeks a job that usually takes 6 weeks and bringing a critical pump station back online after its motor control system was damaged by a lightning strike. Thank you all. Great job. Stormy Molina, $50. Stormy is recognized for his exemplary work in initiating improvements to groundwater system mapping and documentation capabilities and standard operating procedures. Thank you. Wow, I bet Jane's here. Jane Rael, $500 plus 8 hours. Where's Jane? Jane's gonna, oh, Jane thought she was gonna have to take us all to lunch if she came, I think. Jane is recognized for innovating a solution to an, okay. Jane is recognized for innovating a solution to an engineering problem involving the expensive relocation of a 30-inch water line. Her design solution eliminated the need to move the line, potentially saving the utility nearly $800,000. Thanks, Jane. Kathy Leonard, $150 plus 4 hours. Kathy is recognized for her excellent efforts in organizing the utility's annual health and safety event for employees and her success in involving staff, recruiting volunteers and vendors, and making the event a well-attended success. Thank you, Kathy. I don't know who's working. You guys are all here, but thank you. Thank you for everything you do for the city, for the Water Authority, and our customers. Come on down and let us shake your hands. Thank you. I must say, this is the best part of all of our meetings. We appreciate the employees so very much. You are what makes the Water Authority what it is, and we are award-winning because of all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So the first thing on the agenda this evening is public comment. And how many speakers? We have 4 speakers. So each speaker will have 3 minutes. Would you please call the first speaker?
Michael Jensen, followed by Santiago Maestas.
Good evening.
Good evening. It's been a little while since I've been to one of these, but I've been to enough in the last decade, I think. My name is Michael Jensen. I currently work for the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, so I'm not here to talk about anything Santa related on the agenda. But I wanted to just point out something that I've noticed in the last few agendas, and that is that there are substantive discussion items buried in the term water report, which I, who've been to these meetings a lot, recognize as something that generally has a couple of slides on it, like the introductory slides tonight, you know, an update on drought management and an update on the precipitation forecast. So somebody mentioned to me that there was going to be a discussion on the water and sewer service availability for Santa, and I said, that's not on the agenda. I looked at the agenda, and it is on the agenda. It's under water report. And so I believe that you're kind of skirting on the edge of, or maybe crossed over into an Open Meetings Act issue, because you're not providing the public with an accurate, specific list of items that are called for by the Open Meetings Act. And I just wish that you would do that. You could have the water report listed, and then you could list as a second item under open other business whatever else you have. You had earlier, this seems to have started in August, as far as I can tell. You know, you had a groundwater management discussion and something else. It would just be nice if you would make that clear to everybody, because if somebody hadn't pointed it out to me, I wouldn't have come down today. And I alerted some other people who weren't aware of it either. So I just hope that that would get fixed. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen.
Santiago Maestas, followed by Martin Sierra.
Madam Chairman, Santiago Maestas, 5734 Evans Road, Southwest. I'm president of the South Valley Regional Association of Acequias. Our, I guess, worst concerns and have been confirmed with the water availability statement that you'll be reviewing tonight for the Santa development. We had been claiming from the beginning that there wasn't enough water to supply the Santa development, and this water availability statement indicates that is the case. Without without you putting in the Bosque water reclamation plant for $270 million, and ultimately in phase 3, diverting water from the Rio Grande surface water in order to provide water to a water treatment plant. These were the things that we were concerned about, that they are threats to our acequias, threats to agriculture in the middle Rio Grande Valley and in the South Valley of Albuquerque. So with that, once again, we are asking the members of this board to take this into consideration and to maintain the Santa development and reserve until it, in fact, when it's actually needed. And I believe at this time it's not needed, that there is sufficient already legally committed development projects. For example, the Westland Upper project that's going online, that can meet the needs of housing for our community, but without taking away the water that we need to maintain the Valley green and to maintain the culture and traditions that we have in the South Valley with our acequias. So with that, I'd like to, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, sir.
Martin Sierra, followed by Nancy Beers.
Hello. Hey, I'm very honored to be here and accept this award. Also, I'd like to let all of the board members know that Mark Sanchez is doing a wonderful job, and I'd like to be here and thank Mark Sanchez personally for everything he's done for me, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your being here. And now Mark's going to give you more money. Thank you very much. That's good to hear from employees, isn't it? Thank you.
Our last speaker, Nancy Beers.
Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the authority. Well, it's on the laptop, that's fine. Oh, thank you. It is kind of small. Oh, yeah, real small. Well, anyway, as a resident of the Southeast Heights, I just wanted to remind you that there is an upcoming November meeting, public meeting, a quarterly meeting of the Kirtland jet fuel spill cleanup. So I forgot the flyer, so I just printed it off their website, which came out really small. So that is going to be Thursday, November 15th. And there's two parts to that. The first part is the poster session, and it's really a great time, that first hour, to be able to look at something very big and have an expert standing next to you, next to the whatever the information is on the poster board, and be able to kind of ask questions and look at it. Sometimes a lot of us are visual learners and need those visual graphs and pictures to see it and make sense of it, and then have somebody there explaining it to us, walking us through it as we look at it. And then the second half is where we go into the auditorium, and then we do have PowerPoint presentations by a lot of different folks, whether that be Kirtland Air Force Base or whether that be New Mexico Environment Department. And there is a time to ask questions, you know, in case you see all this stuff and your brain kind of, you know, gets all discombobulated and you have to ask questions. So they're there to help you out on that. Of course, we would love to see any and all of you there anytime. So I bring this to your attention as well as the public's. And I can't remember, maybe Councilor Davis could remember and help me out. Isn't there a technical, a public science session the Saturday after this one? But I couldn't find it on my calendar, so I was like, uh-oh. Yeah, we'll find out, and I'll bring that back to you all. Because that's a great time to ask dumb science questions. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. I believe Commissioner O'Malley has a question or a statement.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I actually wasn't about your presentation, so I just wanted to comment when the comment period was over. Is it over?
Yes.
Thank you, I apologize.
That's all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
I just wanted to address the issue of the issue of the item agenda, water report. And I think that we're going to need to, I believe, either have another presentation in the future or so people can respond. I mean, it would be nice if there were people present during the water presentation. So I think there was confusing about this, that we didn't list that as an item. I think there would be a lot of interest in that item. So I'm not sure what we need to do, but I think we're going to need to probably either do another presentation for the public because they didn't know.
Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Malley, certainly there was no intent to confuse the public or mislead or violate the Open Meetings Act, which it does not do. However, your point's well taken. We can certainly have a follow-up presentation and have it listed specifically as an agenda item at the November meeting.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? I think that's the end of public comment then. The next scheduled meeting is November 21st, 2018 at 5 p.m. in the Vincent E. Griego Chambers. Let's change the agenda a little bit and move to item 10A, which is other business. And the first is a water report by Ms. Uhas. Good evening.
Good evening, thank you. This isn't going anywhere. Can somebody fix this so I can make it? Any minute now, there's going to be a water report. Oh. Okay, and now I want to go up and down with it. Okay. I think we're ready now. Madam Chair, members of the board, I have good news for you tonight. The drought status for much of our service area has improved. We are now only in moderate drought. Our drought plan calls for increased advertising and these presentations only when we are in severe drought or worse. So if all goes well, I won't see you for a while. As of October 7th, this year's water use is 422 million gallons less than last year. That's about a 1.75 GPCD reduction, despite the fact that we have received about 1 inch less rainfall than last year. And this next map shows an increased chance for precipitation in October, November, and December. And the maps for early 2019 look just as good as this one. And so with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Uhas. Are there any questions? Yes, Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that you're only supposed to do the water reports during the time of drought, Ms. Uhas, but every time you leave, we go into a drought. So I think if you just continue to, so I think you're good luck for the rain. So thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilor Pena. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Uhas. Thank you for being here. Mr. Harrigan is going to discuss the bond sale update. Good evening, Mr. Harrigan.
Good evening. Madam Chair, members of the authority, I just wanted to, before I go into my presentation, want to congratulate the authority on your AAA upgrade for Standard & Poor's. And it really goes to show that, making decisions based upon data, benchmarking, best practices really pays off. Your staff did an exemplary job during the presentation to Standard & Poor's and Moody's, and you have a fantastic staff, and I really commend you guys. There are really not a lot of AAA rated utilities in the country. Standard & Poor's rates 1,600 utilities, and only 7% of them have a AAA. So you guys are in rare company, so congratulations. I'd like to start off by just previewing the rating reports. The full reports can be available, and if you have a chance, you should read through them. But just to kind of highlight a couple of things that Standard & Poor's mentioned is that the robust planning efforts and your operational management assessment is one, which is the strongest that S&P provides, and they indicate that it provides a strong alignment of operations and organizational goals with ample long-term water supply, conservation, reuse, comprehensive strategic vision that includes benchmarking and high expectations across all operations. This also combined with water and sewer rates that remain very affordable. From a financial standpoint, the authority's financial management assessment is also ranked 1 by S&P, which is the highest, and they mention that the authority maintains most of the best practices that we deem critical to supporting credit quality and these are well embedded in its daily operations and practices, and formal policies support many of these activities. They go on to say that that the outlook is stable, and expect the strong results that the authority has had to continue. Moody's maintained their bond rating of a AA2. Credit strengths that they mentioned were the large system size, service area, and long-term water supply, the stable customer base anchored by government and higher education institutions, and improving debt service coverage. Credit challenges that they did mention are aging assets that require significant future investment, and that their outlook is also stable. Just to kind of provide sort of a high-level overview of the pricing is that we went into the market yesterday, and of the roughly 75 million of total par amount that was sold, the authority ended up receiving over 600 million in orders, and we'll kind of talk about what that did to the pricing. It was obviously positive, and that is attributable in large part due to the very high bond ratings that the authority has. J.P. Morgan and R.W. Baird were the authority's underwriters in the transaction. As mentioned in our September meeting on the maturity structure, the bonds mature within 12 years, which is consistent with the authority's policy. The bonds are also optionally redeemed in 2026, which is an 8-year call, which gives the authority the flexibility to be able to redeem the bonds and, if possible, lower the interest rates in the future. On this page, I'd like to highlight that, as I mentioned, there was 645 million of total orders, which means that that your bond issue was oversubscribed by about 8.6 times. And when we, in going out in the original yields into the market, due to the oversubscription and the high demand, the authority was able to see their yields reduced anywhere between 4 to 9 basis points across the board. And in particular, just to kind of highlight a couple of maturities, in 2029, the authority has about 8.2 million in par amount and received 107 million of orders for that maturity, just to kind of give you a highlight the strong demand that was for the authority's bonds. We also compared how the authority priced to its last issuance back in 2017, and the authority, and we compare to the AAA MMD, since market moves based upon what's going on in the current interest rate market environment. We base that on what the current AAA MMD is, and from 2017, the authority priced anywhere between 2 to 17 basis points tighter than it did back in 2017, and again, that's attributable in part to the upgrade to AAA. From a timing schedule, we plan to close this transaction on the 31st, and that is when funds will be available for the authority to expend on the projects. We do have some information on the market, which I won't go through, but you can look through at your leisure. And with that, I will turn it over to Catherine McKinney, with the Module Law Firm, to go over the pricing certificate. But before that, I'll stand for any questions, actually.
Are there any questions? Thank you, Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Madam Chair and
Thank you.
members of the board. What I passed out is the sales certificate related to the bonds, and it reflects the pricing that Eric just went over with you. When you adopted the ordinance and confirming resolution back in September, we employed the delegation and permitted Mark Sanchez as executive director to approve the final terms of the bond within the parameters outlined in that ordinance. And all the sales certificate does is represent that all of those parameters were met. The sale came within the confines of the parameter and was very successful. So that's just an informational item to close the loop on the delegation.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Stomp is going to give us a presentation on the Santa Lena project. Good evening, Mr. Stomp.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Let's see if I can make this bigger. So I'm going to step through the water and sewer serviceability statement tonight, and I will be back again in the November meeting to not just redo this presentation, but answer any additional questions you have and try to address some of the questions that were brought up this evening in the public comment. So just to put together the timeline for you, Bernalillo County approved the Level A and Level B1 land use plans. Following that, the developer requested a water and sewer serviceability on January 11, 2018, and they provided additional information in February to address the difference between our adopted conservation goals and what they had originally submitted in terms of demand. There was a water reuse and sewer serviceability issued in October 1st, and I think we need to make sure that everybody understands that that is not a commitment for service. It's an outline of the infrastructure that would be required, that would be outlined in a development agreement that would be must be approved by this board. So without an approved development agreement by this board, there is no commitment for service. What this serviceability does do is outline the specific infrastructure, and the reason why that infrastructure is to follow the Water Authority policies on no net expense, following Water 2120, our line extension policy, and our other policies. In terms of the overview, Santa Lena itself in the Level B1 is proposed to be about 22,000 people and ultimately 95,000 people in full build-out. That's equivalent to about the population of Rio Rancho or Las Cruces. So if you think about the level of infrastructure that's required to service those communities, you start to get a picture of what that's going to look like in Albuquerque. And in addition to that, because of our Water 2120 goals, we're focused on sustainability, renewable supplies, and reuse. So the way we build infrastructure and the way we are doing it is based on the Water 2120 plan, which is a little bit different than the pumping groundwater like Rio Rancho and Las Cruces do. We also took their demands that they gave to us, and we broke those potable demands out to potable and non-potable. They did not propose any reuse systems in their original requests, and so we broke those out. The ultimate demands that they're requesting are 2,700 acre-feet in the Level B1 and 11,700 acre-feet in the Level A full build-out. In terms of population projections, this is the low growth scenario that was provided in the Water 2120 plan, and the idea here is just to show how that population increase would fit into that plan. We do have the capability to serve them, and it would fall within the population projections that were provided in the low growth and medium growth scenarios in the Water 2120 plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just the next slides. So to put it in context, for the low growth scenario, Santa Lena represents, or the proposed population represents 15% of the future growth in the low growth scenario. So it's a significant increase in terms of the projected total growth as it relates to our 100-year plan in the low growth scenario. In the medium growth scenario on the following slide, you see that it's about 11%. So we have the three different population projections: low growth, medium growth, and high growth, and this represents more than 10% in either the low or the medium growth projections. In terms of demands, as this development grows over time, you're going to see demands increasing over time, and as those demands increase over time, the infrastructure that required will be phased in to meet those demands. So we'll talk about how we're going to meet those demands, potentially meet those demands with the infrastructure, starting with basically no population and then working up to full build-out. So they're proposing growth starting in 2020, we're showing, and then we increase demand with potable and non-potable up to the level B1 in about 2035 or so, and then projected full build-out at about 2065 with a maximum peak day demand of about 15 million gallons per day. In terms of our total system projected demands over time, this is the 3 growth scenarios, but actually related to demands in the Water 2120 plan, and you can see we're projecting increased growth and increased demand over time, and the 3 different lines are the low growth, medium growth, and high growth. These are based on 110 gallons per capita per day, which is the policy that was set by this board, and the plan also includes expanded reuse, as we've talked about before, and the different population projections fit within those ranges. In terms of Santa Elena, what's their contribution to the future demand? So in the low growth scenario, you can see that Santa Elena represents about 9% of the future projected demand. But if you look at the little square there, you can see that Santa Elena represents a much larger percentage of the future demand projected on the west side of Albuquerque. So the west side has a smaller population projected to grow more in the future. You can see the impact on the total demand on the existing on the west side now, and then that would be committed for Santa Elena in the future. So the stepwise approach that we had to take was to evaluate what are our existing legal commitments that we have right now, and what available capacity would we have once we've looked at those dedicated commitments. So there's 3 major commitments that we've made. One is the service area that we have that was adopted when this board was formed, and that's the purple area in this drawing. We have said that we will provide water and sewer service in perpetuity to that service area. So we calculated that percent of demand, especially on the west side. We separated out the east and the west side. So we projected both existing growth that's there and future growth for the undeveloped areas in the service area. Then we looked at the development agreements that have been approved by this board, and we added the development agreements on top of that. So we started with the service area, we worked with the development agreements, and the last thing was our legal obligations that we have with existing contract customers, like Intel, for example, and the Village of Corrales. We have committed sewage allowed for discharge of sewage into our system from Intel and Corrales, totaling about 7.5 million gallons a day in terms of what our legal obligations. So we compared the legal obligations to our actual infrastructure to try to figure out whether there was any existing capacity available. We had the water, sewer, and reuse systems. And then we show the existing systems both on the west side and the east side. On the west side, we'll talk a little bit about the capacity limitations, both from the sewer side and from the water side, but there is no existing reuse that's occurring on the west side today. If you go to the next slide, this identifies what our existing capacity limitations are. So on the water side, we have legally committed all of our available supply on the west side. We have not used all of the groundwater supply that we have available on the west side because it has high arsenic, and we have not built the facilities to do that. We are transferring east side groundwater over to the west side in order to do this. But if you look at our legal obligations that I talked about before, those 3 legal obligations, we're legally committed to the existing supply that we have on the west side. In addition, on the, I'm sorry.
Mr. Stomp?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stump. If I could, just to clarify that point, the available groundwater is that black dot in the middle there, but our legal obligations exceed that. I assume that means system-wide we're compensating for that, but you're talking about the existing unavailable groundwater. It's there, but we can't use it. So right now, does the west side have a deficit essentially of groundwater to use? Is that what I understood?
Madam Chair and Councilor Davis, exactly. There's an existing deficit. We have the available resources there, but they're costly to build the arsenic treatment, so we're transferring that across. So we're feeding that deficit from the east side.
And so anyone that wanted to count that groundwater would have to build the capacity or the infrastructure to treat it and make it usable in order for us to make it available for new west side development.
Well, Madam Chair and Councilor
I'm sorry,
Davis,
Madam Chair.
there's two choices with that. Anybody that would need new capacity would maybe have to drill new wells or to put arsenic treatment on the existing wells, but the existing wells are already legally committed. So we're talking about, in this serviceability, additional groundwater capacity that would be needed. So continuing there, in terms of the west side infrastructure, we also looked at the interceptor capacity and we looked at the treatment capacity at the south side water reclamation plant. The Southside Water Reclamation Plant has a capacity of 76 million gallons a day. We're legally obligated up to about 71 million gallons a day. And this board has made a policy statement that that plant will not be expanded. So in that detail there, we show the existing capacity, the existing system demand, which is 51 million gallons a day, the projected demand of 70, and then we also show the future Bosque plant and the future Tejeras plant. So that's just showing the two plants that are identified in Water 2120, what that capacity addition would be if those plants were built. They are planned to be built as part of our long-term plan. So in terms of the additional requirements for Santa Elena, there's really three systems that need to be built. There's a water system, a reuse system, and a wastewater system. The wastewater system itself is a series of interceptors that would serve the Santa Elena development that would discharge to new water reclamation facilities that are built specifically for Santa Elena, starting with a 1 million gallon a day plant to meet their non-potable needs, and then ultimately to a 7 million gallon a day plant. And then on the water infrastructure side, we would start with the tanks and reservoirs that would be necessary to build them, and ultimately we would have a surface water diversion that would be blended with reuse water to provide for their drinking water. But the first thing that needs to get done is to free up additional capacity on the west side by building the Bosque reuse system. Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Stomp, if I may, when you say we will have to build, you mean we will have to build, but someone else will have to pay for it. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, I apologize. When I say we, I don't mean we. I mean the developer will have to build. I want to make them, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
I get rolling here and I just keep saying we, so I apologize.
We
Everything
is-
that's outlined in this presentation is for the developer to construct.
So we is they.
We is they,
Thank you.
if that makes sense. All right. Thank you for that clarification. And so this is the list of infrastructure that would be required. And as I talked about, as demand started at 0 and then increased over time, that infrastructure would be built in phases. And the first phase of that on the next slide is really the idea is to free up existing capacity or free up capacity on the west side by building the Bosque reuse plant. So the Bosque reuse plant would take effluent, treat it, serve it to existing sites that are being currently fed by potable water. That would free up the potable water for them to use, and it would relieve the existing interceptors that wastewater is being taken down to about 4 million gallons a day. So it frees up capacity both on the interceptor side and on the drinking water side for them. And then ultimately over time, as they grow, they will ultimately build a surface water treatment plant and a reuse plant that will be capable of treating wastewater in combination with the surface water and blended for drinking water source.
Excuse me, Mr. Stomp.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Stomp. Just have a quick question. So the treating the affluent water frees up potable water. Potable water ends up where?
The potable water would end up, sorry, Madam Chair and Commissioner O'Malley, the potable water would end up freeing up capacity for them to use. So they
Okay.
would be building infrastructure to free up capacity for them to use the
So the
water.
potable water then gets cleaned, or is it just become used as for irrigation, et cetera? Or?
Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Malley, the potable water that's being served on the irrigation sites would
Right.
no longer be served, and that water would be available for the Santa Elena development. That site that was served with potable water would be served with non-potable water, so that's where the Bosque reuse plant would come in.
Okay, so at some point, though, we're talking about water that gets cleaned up for drinking water, but this isn't it. This is potable water that's being used for irrigation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The first phase of the reuse system is the
Okay, to
Bosque
free up
reuse
the-
plant.
all
That
right,
frees
thank
up the capacity.
Okay, got it.
I apologize, this is complex and I'm trying to do it in a way that people understand, but I may not do a very good job of that tonight.
Thank
so
you for letting
I'll
us.
do my best.
Thank you for letting us interrupt you.
No, it's no
Go
problem.
ahead, Mr. Stomp.
The last slide is the projected phasing, and this phasing is based on the demand projections that we used from the information that was provided by the developer. The initial onset requires the Bosque treatment plant enabled to free up the capacity for them to use the supply that would be available and also free up capacity in the interceptors. That's the purple. That's called the Bosque reuse plant. The blue would be the transmission lines, and the other blue would be the additional groundwater supply. As Councilor Davis pointed out, that would be additional supplies, or if from a policy perspective, if we wanted to allow them to build arsenic treatment systems, that's something we could do, but they would have to reimburse us for the value of those existing assets. We wouldn't allow them to just use our assets without paying for them. The second phase of the project would be a new reuse plant along with additional groundwater supply, and that would take place in about 2035 or so. And that would be phase 2, and that would be at the end of the level B. And then finally, the last phase would be 2045, which would include drinking the wastewater from the wastewater plant in combination with surface water as a drinking water source in 2045. That would be the infrastructure that would provide for Santa Elena on the west side starting in about 2020 and then going out to 2065 till full build out. And that was a lot to take in 25 minutes. I apologize, Madam Chair. But I'll be back again in November to clean it up a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Stomp. Are there any questions? Ms. Nair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Stomp, can you talk us through the next steps in terms of what this board will be hearing and what our decision points are, please?
Madam Chair, so the next step is a development agreement. If and only if, number one, the developer agrees that this is the infrastructure that they're going to build, and then that development agreement would be developed over some period of time. So it could take months or it could take much longer than that. I'm not really sure how long that could take. I want to remind you and let everybody know that this serviceability statement is only good for 1 year. So we issued it on October 1st, so if we're not able to negotiate a development agreement by October 1st next year, then it is possible for us to reissue a water and sewer serviceability statement again, or the existing one could be extended if we're in negotiations. So the process will be we'll negotiate a potential development agreement, and if we're able to do that, then that would come before this board for approval, and then it's all up to you to decide whether or not you believe that that development agreement is in the best interest of our ratepayers and the Water Authority as a whole.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. Stomp. When you go back to the slide when you were talking about the population growth, so I think you had 1 or 2 on there. I think the first one.
This one?
Yeah. So when you're talking about the growth, and this is on our 20 what plan?
2120.
2120 plan. So when you talk about that growth, it's does that include the Santa Elena, or is that just growth that we're going to have no matter what?
Madam Chair and Councilor Pena, this is the projected growth that we would anticipate in the service area. And we didn't identify in Water 2120 where that growth would occur. So definitely it could be the Santa Elena development, or it could be other areas. It could be Mesa del Sol, it could be the service area. So we didn't specifically identify, but that is the future growth population starting from today's population to this projection at the end, which is, I believe in the low growth scenario, is about 1.3 million.
Thank you.
Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Stomp, thank you for this. I appreciate it. It is technical, but you do a great job of translating it to English for me, and I appreciate that. I wanted to ask, really, I want to go back to that point that you made earlier and just make it particularly clear as we do this. Sort of any developer comes forward, whether it's a small subdivision or a big one, in this case, or a big development, and part of their process has to be asking the Water Authority to tell us, or tell them, it's they, what it would take in order to get water and sewer. And that's really what this is, right? This is not a commitment by the Water Authority, but it is here's what it would take in order for you to hook onto our system. Is that right?
Madam Chair and Councilor Davis, I do want to make one distinction there. Inside the service area where we have adopted service area, we've already committed service in that area. So if a development comes forward in that existing adopted service area, we will grant them service, and we will tell them what that is. If it's outside of that service area, then our policies state that you, the Water Authority Board, will make that decision in terms of a development agreement.
Thank you. That's important. Thank you, and I appreciate it. And that's why we're doing this, and thank you. I heard 2 things. I think we touched on it a minute ago. One about this assumes that, or requires that they will have to come up they will have to come up with additional groundwater capacity at some point, and we talked through, they would have to clean up some of the wells that we've already compensated that might free up supply and some other things. But I also heard you say that at some point, they would also be triggering some surface water additional surface water diversion. Does our current San Juan Chama plan in 2120, do we have the capacity to do that with, we're planning for climate change and we're planning for lower water capacity. Do we have the capacity for additional diversion down the road?
Madam Chair and Councilor Davis, the short answer is yes. Right. But I do want to make sure that you understand what this plan proposes is that the Bosque reuse plant would serve non-potable water in the summer months. In the winter months, it would be discharging wastewater to the river. That water is part of the water that we're talking about diverting as part of this. So it becomes the ultimate reuse situation where they're discharging just upstream, we're diverting it right downstream. So I don't know that it will necessarily require any additional San Juan Chama water use, maybe in the original short term, but ultimately that discharge at the Bosque will offset the diversions there, so the net difference will be zero.
So essentially, we're sticking it back in the river, and they're just taking it back out, reusing it, and putting it back, and how do we do that? So it's using the water we hear.
Madam Chair, Councilor Davis, ultimately that will be the case. Initially, of course, as it's growing, that it won't be, but that would ultimately be the case. And just to put this out there for November, I will be glad to talk a bit more about the percentages of water and how the non-potable and potable meet the entire demand in terms of how it meets the Water 2120 policy. So I could show you how that works a little bit better, I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Stomp. Madam Chair, if I could have one more to follow.
Of course.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Stomp, as we look at the projections that Councilor Pena, Board Member Pena brought up, this is our, as you mentioned, this is our population projection. This is what everybody sort of agrees our regional population is going to get to. Depending on where they end up living is a different question. Whether they infill on the east side, whether we expand something like Mesa del Sol or expand on the west side is really a confluence of all these sort of policy decisions about what do we do with that 9, 11, basically 10% of that growth that could be Santolina or could be in a different location. Is that essentially what we're saying here? We've planned as the board and as the utility has planned for population growth to meet this. We just haven't designated sort of where that growth would go. Is that correct in terms of water capacity? Is that correct?
Absolutely, Madam Chair and Councilor Davis. I think the key issue is that we are not in the land use business. Right. We do not make land use decisions. So land use decisions are afforded by other entities like Bernalillo County and the city of Albuquerque. Those decisions ultimately drive where the population goes. And so we did not make that distinction as where it go because we don't make those decisions. Sure. We're just telling you and the public that we have the availability to serve this population in the future if that population actually occurs.
Thank you, Mr. Stomp. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Malley.
Thank you. And additionally, you're talking really about infrastructure. Does the infrastructure exist to carry, water wherever? And so in this case, you're saying that in some areas it doesn't exist, and therefore whoever's developing that will have to provide that infrastructure. So that makes sense. I think also in the presentation, it'd be very important to address the issue of irrigation and the system. Because, recently we had a situation, this last summer, where the water coming down the river into the system, the irrigation system, the Asecu system, they had fewer watering days, and didn't make it far enough. And in our case, because we're irrigators, we actually just let the water go. Because we knew that downstream people really needed it. So I think that's going to be really important because we are talking about that water coming from that system. I mean, it's coming down sometimes people are like, this is different water. No, it's the same water. So if we could address that, I think that'd be real important, especially for folks who are irrigators and want to make sure that they have that, that asset. So the next presentation, if we could address that, that'd be important.
Sure, Madam Chair and Commissioner O'Malley, I will be glad to address that. I would say that our plan is based on not purchasing additional water rights and not transferring and drying up irrigated ag in the future. Our plan in the past was to do that, and clearly we've changed that direction. So I could show you exactly, I think, how that's going to be done within the context of this development, but also in Water 2120. Our plan is not to drive these acres, and in fact, I think this year, this board made an excellent decision in keeping the water in the river this year, and I hope that the South Valley irrigators benefited from that, along with a lot of other irrigators, and the environment in terms of what looked like in the Albuquerque stretch. So you guys should be commended for that. And I hope, as Mr. Maestas said earlier, and as he said a couple months ago, thank you for that. I hope that made a difference for them this year too. But I will address that in November.
Thank you. And Commissioner Talbert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Stump, thank you for clarifying Councilor Davis's question around not being in the land use business. If our population grows, we have to serve that population. I think what we get hung up on is people using terms in places where they don't want growth to occur. So using a term like if it's the Santolina development or if it's the XYZ development, irrelevant. It's if there's growth in our city through population increasing, we serve them, we're able to serve them, which is what I'm hearing, correct?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Talbert, the answer is yes, but as Commissioner O'Malley stated, there is a big difference between inside of the service area where infrastructure exists, although it does not exist everywhere in the service area, and this area out here where infrastructure doesn't exist. So what you're seeing with this water and sewer serviceability is the fact that there is not infrastructure, and so in order to meet the Water 2120 goals, there's a significant amount of infrastructure that has to be built. So we didn't say we didn't have the availability to serve because we do. The issue is how do we get the water to them and how do they meet the policy objectives that are set by this board? And I think that's what we tried to do here.
Fair. And I think that the issue of looking at this as a holistic approach, meaning if the usage isn't occurring in the east and can go to the west, that's fine, right? And vice versa. If it ever goes back to the east, you go back the other side. So I think it's taking that approach saying, hey, we have so much water, if it's more needed over here because that's where the growth is, population growth, send it there. I don't know that that's happening every day. All I know is I go in, I turn on the faucet, I have water, and that's what everyone does, right? They don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
They just know they get water. So anyway, thanks for that clarification.
Well, I do
Thanks,
want to
Madam
address
Chair.
one issue, Madam Chair and Commissioner Talbert. When we transfer water from the east side to the west side, we're relying on infrastructure that crosses the river, and we're relying on a single source of supply to do that. So in the event that a Comcast cable company or somebody comes in and drills a hole in our line and that line's out of service, then we need to have the redundant capacity available to serve that near the site or somewhere on the west side. So we can transfer water, and we can transfer a lot of water from the east side to the west side, and we do that. But there are some risks and some vulnerabilities associated with that, with the potential for somebody to do some damage to our lines, and then they're out of service.
So that's another discussion for this board then to make sure that we have the capable redundancy regardless of growth or not. We're pumping water across the river already, whether we have 50 million people join us, 40 million, whatever, 40,000, those kind of. So we need to address that. If that's a concern and a true risk to you, then we need to figure that out, because that's a whole nother story if you're not comfortable with our current system being able to transfer back and forth between the two systems.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Talbert, I am very comfortable with our system. It works every day. This plan does provide for the redundant capacity on the west side. That's what that 6 million gallons a day is 3 times, or 18 million gallons. That is to provide that water availability. And again, when we're talking groundwater, I want to make sure we're clear. We're talking about peak demands, and we're talking about when surface water is not available. We're not talking about increasing our groundwater use as a result of this development or any other development, because in Water 2120, as you know, we've set a management level in the aquifer, and we're managing around that aquifer, and we're going to build the infrastructure to protect the aquifer for the future. So groundwater is for peak demands and when surface water supplies aren't available.
And to clarify, I did not mean to say 50 million people. That is unreasonable in the city or anywhere else right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Stump. Thank you, Madam Chair. And back on, but Mr. Stump, you brought up a point, and thank you, Commissioner, for bringing that up. We're not in the land use business at this board anyway. But if this water authority enters into a development agreement with, say, Santolina, we are effectively limiting options of available water for future developments that may or may not be here yet. Is that right?
Madam Chair and Councilor Davis.
outside of the service area anyway.
It's a first come, first served basis in the sense of our availability of supply. Now, we have the 100 years where we're projecting various population growth. And again, there's a lot more. As you can see, Santa Elena represents 9% or 10% or 11%, depending on which medium growth or low growth scenarios you are. So we are limiting in a sense that you're obligating capacity for 9% or 10% that would be available for populations in other parts of the city. But once you make that commitment, we're legally obligated, as you know.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Mr. Stomp, thank you very much.
Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate it. That is our last other business. We'll go on to 7, which is introductions of legislation. There are no new items. Consent agenda, there are no items. Therefore, we'll go to approvals, R1825. Mr. Roth.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this resolution authorizes the Water Authority to submit an application to the Los Padillas project. This is also called Phase 7 of the South Valley Drinking Water Project. This project includes the construction of 5.5 miles of water lines connecting several hundred households. The funding request is for $3.4 million. We anticipate that 75% of that will be through subsidy because the area does qualify for disadvantaged community status. The terms and the conditions of this financing will be determined after we submit the application, but the loan and grant agreement will come back to this board for your approval. So this resolution simply authorizes us to submit the application.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Any questions?
Madam
Councilor
Chair, I
O'Malley.
just have a quick question.
Mr.
So
O'Malley.
this is for a grant, so this is not for a loan or anything like that? It's for grant assistance?
Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Malley, is a combination of grant and loan. We anticipate that it's 75% grant, 25% loan.
Okay. I was just wondering with the, financial boom at the state level, if we have to get a loan, or if we can just get all the money. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I move approval of R1825. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. The next is item B, which is C1833. Mr. Bustos.
We can probably turn this one
Good
off,
evening.
but, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. A year ago, I stand here and we talked about donating trees, purchasing and donating trees for the city. Those city trees have been planted. 23 parks in the southern quadrant of the city received 150 new trees. Our tree rate has contributed, thanks to our customers, and through the tree rate, we planted another 800 trees so far this year, and close to 1,200 last year. So I stand here to present an agreement that we're extending to Bernalillo County. And with me is Ed Martinez. He's the land manager, section manager for open space, recreation, and parks for Bernalillo County. And Megan Marcy, she's the water conservation and resource manager. This agreement will be $20,000, and Ed has something to share and how it's going to help the county goals, and also Megan.
Thank you. Good evening.
Madam Chair, members of the board. The coming planting season, September 2018 through June 2019, will be focused in districts 2, 4, and 4, which consist of district areas located southwest and northwest of Albuquerque metropolitan areas. These areas consist of some of the Bernalillo County's most underserved rural areas, communities, and parks in all. There are about 45 county parks in District 2 and 4. It's really great to work in partnership with the water authorities. Our goal is to go through all our districts and put trees in. The canopy is very important. Not only does it add to the aesthetics and property values, it brings us oxygen, and everybody loves them. I love trees, so I'm hoping to go and plant.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. I just wanted to thank the board as well for considering this MOU to donate trees to the county and increase tree canopy coverage in the county and in the Middle Rio Grande. As the county's water conservation program manager, I just wanted to speak to the water conservation benefits of this MOU. Planting more trees will mitigate the urban heat island effect in Albuquerque and will ultimately conserve water by reducing water use for energy production. So we really sincerely appreciate the Water Authority partnering with us through this MOU, as well as some other water conservation efforts. You all offer us free facility audits, and there's another MOU to return irrigation surcharges and water waste fees to us for outdoor water efficiency projects. So we feel like these projects are going to have long-term effects that are going to benefit both of our organizations and our community, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Commissioner O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think this is a great project. I'm really happy, even though I don't get any trees. But, no, I really support the other districts. I don't know why. I couldn't even get 3 or 4 trees, I guess. It's okay.
I'll find you some.
You'll find me some trees.
Thank you. With that,
No,
there's a
it's great.
motion, make a motion to approve C 1833. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor? Yes. Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Next is C 1834. Mr. Cadena.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the board. I present to you a service connection agreement for a proposed car wash located near the intersection McMahon and Unser. It's outside the adopted service area, therefore it needs board approval. There's existing infrastructure adjacent to the property, so all that's required are just routine connections. The property will be required to pay the water supply charges and utility expansion charges.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I move approval of C 1834. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Motion carries. Next is C 1835, which is approved change order 3 for the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority billing system upgrade. Mr. Stinson? You don't have to come if you want. There's a motion to approve, a motion and a second to approve. Are there any questions? All those in favor say yes. Yes. Motion carries. Next is C 1836, approval of the contract with Affordable Solar Installation to finance, construct, own, operate, and sell electricity to the authority from a solar energy facility at the San Juan Chama Drinking Water Treatment Plant. Move approval. There's a motion and a second. Mr. Stomp, do you want to speak or do you want us to vote?
Whatever you like, Madam Chair.
All those in favor say yes. Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.